Dan Smith is the lead singer and songwriter with the hugely successful band, whose first album, Bad Blood, became just one of 10 debut albums to have hit 1 million sales in the last 10 years. Since forming in 2010, the band have released 3 albums and achieved chart success with hits like Pompeii, Happier and Flaws, which we played earlier in the programme, taking home the prize for Breakthrough Act at the 2014 Brit Awards. Their 4th album, Give Me the Future, is out next week with techno beats, 80s retro futuristic tones and sweeping production. The album dives into the world of science fiction, exploring the way technology can be a tool for escape. And that is a line from a press release, if ever I read one. Dan, welcome to Times Radio. How are you?
How's it going? Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm all right today. I'm all right. You know, it's January, so it takes a bit to summon up the full range of enthusiasms, but I'm doing all right. The album sounds brilliant. Tell me a little bit about it. What were your main influences when you were writing it? Was it written during lockdown?
We started it just before, a little while before lockdown, actually. Our third album, we like to make things really complicated for ourselves. So our third album was a concept album set over the course of one night out during a sort of fictional, but not that hard to relate to, apocalypse outside. And it was all about sort of hedonism and trying to shut out what was going on outside, you know, temporarily as one way of coping for a second. So we sort of came out of touring that, which obviously, I don't know, having to sort of sing an apocalypse every night about the state of the world was a little bit depressing. Yeah, it was a weird contrast between kind of the hedonism of the record and the kind of apocalypse of world news. So coming out of that, I guess we felt it was probably time for our 4th album to make something a bit more hopeful. But I'm really obsessed with ideas of escapism and the ways that we, you know, the ways that we distract ourselves and escape from our daily lives and from whatever's going on in our heads. And that's always kind of run through our music quite a lot. But with this album, I actually saw a show at Edinburgh Comedy Festival that was all about this thing called maladaptive daydreaming, and which is a way to sort of deal with trauma that some people are able to do sort of subconsciously, where you can basically live like a parallel life for 7-8 hours a day. And this comedian did this amazing show about it, and it made me think loads about, you know, just the incredible ways that the human mind, you know, consciously or subconsciously distracts itself. So this is a very long, circuitous way of saying we ended up making this album sort of from before lockdown, but as, you know, living through lockdowns and the pandemic and you know, the sort of apocalyptic feel of life over the last couple of years.
Oh, your sound has just gone really horribly bad. I think I'm going to just let our listeners know what's coming up later today on Times Radio, and hopefully we'll get Dan back in a moment. It sounds like, because the album has a bit of a sci-fi theme, it sounds like aliens were invading his sound system at that point. There's lots to look forward to on this show, including getting Dan Smith back in a moment and on Times Radio later as well. And I think we've got Dan Smith from Bastille back on the line. Dan, you were talking about, you know, the sort of influences on the album. And I know a big one is, well, sci-fi. I mean, do you think we have to look to the future to be optimistic? Where does your sci-fi interest come from?
Sorry for my really well-timed technical problems. I guess, yeah. So yeah, we're trying to make this album about escapism, and it became really influenced by the time that we had in lockdown. I like some people, sort of tried to stay really busy to distract myself from the madness of what everyone was going through, you know, in various different ways. And we decided the album would be a sci-fi. And it's such an amazing genre, you know, that explores the complexities of current times by looking to imagined versions of the future. And obviously there's a huge wealth of science fiction in literature and, you know, in film and TV and, you know, so many different forms of fiction to kind of explore. Yeah, I guess I wanted to, you know, we set out to make this album about escapism and distraction, but it kept coming back to the way of the world and this weird environment we live in where, you know, we're constantly confronted by what the future might look like via the news and, you know, potentially climate change, but we're also like living via our screens, and technology is just so stitched into every single little corner of a lot of people's lives, and how interesting that is. And, you know, I know it's a cliche to say it, but, you know, truth is often stranger than fiction. And you know, a lot of the most imaginative science fiction writers of the past probably couldn't have dreamt up quite where we've got to as a kind of society in the world, but also wanting to talk about all that stuff in the context of hopefully a nice, escapist, interesting, weird, pop record. So
does sci-fi make you feel optimistic? I mean, I'm trying to think of optimistic futures that I've seen either films about or read books about. And I'm struggling here. Actually,
I know. It's quite hard to think of any sort of utopias that aren't tinged with complexity, isn't it? Does science fiction make me feel optimistic? I don't think so. I think because it's generally there as a bit of a warning sign to now. What makes me optimistic is, I guess, the idea that people, anyone that wants to change the world, be that with an invention or, as an activist or whatever, they have to see through the kind of pessimism and the darkness of the current times and imagine something better. And I guess have the optimism and imagination to conceive of a future that is better than this, and whatever that may be, and then to manifest it. And I think that's really impressive and that's really inspiring. So I look to inventors and scientists and activists, all those kind of people who at the moment are seeing through the fog of how confusing life could be and hoping for something better. I think science fiction writers are often the kind of the doom criers of culture, but it's such a fascinating genre. I think, there's people can kind of write off sci-fi as lightweight or whatever, but I think it speaks to the present times in such a fascinating, interrogative way.
I was talking to Ollie Alexander at the beginning of the week, and he was telling me that he thought he really liked sort of being on his own, and he was always trying to get space back to just have some downtime in solitude. But actually lockdown had kind of taught him that perhaps he didn't like his own company that much, and that loneliness had figured largely. What are you like about being on your own? How did it work out for you? How did you manage to manifest something so upbeat as this album through that period of time? Or do you think you thrive in solitude because you've got endless loops of songs and activity going on in your brain?
Yeah, I'm terrible. I'm absolutely terrible by myself. I know I rarely spend time alone, apart from really making music. And I always draw on like life experience and fiction and history and things that I'm interested in. But I guess for me, I spend nearly all my time with my friends or on tour or with family, and I was lucky to not spend lockdown by myself. I can imagine it would have been, for friends of mine and people that I know who did, it was such a challenging time because missing that connection, both kind of physical and just, I don't know, the camaraderie of being with people was just so brutal for so many people. I was lucky to spend lockdown living with friends, and I guess like a lot of this album, it's our most collaborative album that we've ever made. Normally, I write all the songs and I work on them with the guys in the band and co-produce it with our friend Mark, who's a brilliant producer. But that's been our process, since we started. And I think with this album, we made the decision before lockdown to make it really collaborative and, to bring in a lot of the sort of friends I've made along the way as a songwriter for other people. That's quite a sort of a sociable, collaborative world. So I was like, let's just take the pressure off us a little bit and bring in loads of other musicians and producers and writers to kind of help and make this a big communal experience. And that worked out really well in lockdowns because it meant that, when we could all be in a room together, we were. Failing that, everyone was sending in different parts and we were mixing them all together, and I was doing sessions over Zoom, which,
How was that?
It was, it was kind of, at the beginning, I tried to work on a production, which was a bit of a nightmare, sort of trying to work on all the music and the sounds. But when I sort of stripped it back to just two people over Zoom with like a guitar or a piano, just focusing on the music and the lyrics, actually, it was all right. We had a bunch of songs that I wrote over the last couple of years over Zoom that I absolutely love, feel really important within our career, and wouldn't have existed without it. So, it did allow people to collaborate and be in touch in that way. And I guess the point is, like, no one really wants to be on Zoom any longer than they absolutely have to be. So it was very efficient.
Time efficient is so true. It's like chop, the meeting's over. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are 3 songs on the album that I wrote with this guy, Rami Jakub, who's a Swedish songwriter who lives in the States. And I've written with him before, so I kind of knew him and we had, a bit of a relationship and knew each other like as mates. So that was kind of easy as a place to start. But we had one evening on Zoom where we wrote 3 of the songs on the album, the kind of bones of them, in a couple of hours, just because he's quite quick as a writer, I'm quite quick, and it, you know, again, neither of us wanted to be on there any longer than we had to be. So yeah, you know, and again, I looked at that one evening that's informed, you know, almost like a quarter of the album, and that's kind of nuts, and definitely wouldn't have happened any other way.
You better be careful, or Zoom are going to be looking for points on your album. Tell me about the track Thelma and Louise. Obviously, a brilliant film, but I mean, I know you see it as a really sort of heartening, brilliant image of liberation and independence. But I have rethought my opinion of that film and kind of decided that it's also an enormous tragedy that these 2 amazing women felt that was the only way to kind of end.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I'm quite happily editing out the ending in a part of it that I'm choosing to see. You know, I guess the ultimate form of liberation shouldn't and never should be sort of driving off a cliff because you don't feel like you have a choice.
Very good health and safety, obviously. There, Dan.
Yeah, you're welcome, guys. Yeah, I guess I don't know. I love not only the idea that these two empowered women are kind of rejecting the lives, both in terms of work and relationships, that they just aren't fulfilled by, and taking, you know, agency into their own hands. I love that idea, and that, you know, there are moments of kind of freedom in it that feel just like the perfect embodiment of escapism, and that's kind of what that's the sort of bit we were searching for. But I think for me, it was so interesting watching the film a bunch and reading about it and thinking about the context. Like, I remember, it came at a time where the idea of a big Hollywood film with a female director and 2 female stars who weren't in their early 20s.
It was ridiculous.
Was so uncommon, but it was a box office success and it was a critical success. And I know I was reading this article that people at the time felt like, oh, maybe this is a shift in what's the norm in Hollywood and in culture, and a real excitement around that. And unfortunately, it just wasn't that shift at all. And so in writing the song, like often when I'm writing songs where I know very specifically what they're about, there was so much to say. I mean, the song's only 2 minutes long, but I must have written about 50 verses, because, you know, there were versions where I was trying to get in the sort of context of the film, and I was trying to get in the darkness of it, and I guess we sort of took the editorial decision that for the purposes of this album, they wanted to get in some of the complexities, but, you know, ultimately in this story, it's that moment of escape, and it's that kind of digital cosplay of like, who could you be if you wanted to escape, and, you know, why would you not want to be Thelma and or Louise at their happier moments?
Thank you for explaining. This is Mariella Frostrup on Times Radio. My guest is the singer, songwriter, well, you know, a very, very, very large part of Bastille, Dan Smith, and we'll be right back after this. I'm talking to Dan Smith from Bastille. Dan, let's talk about one more song on the album, and then I want to talk about you, which you'll probably dread. But No Bad Days. Well, it is sort of talking about you, even talking about this, because it's about your aunt who died of cancer a few years ago, made a rather brave choice, and you've celebrated it in this song. Tell me about writing this.
Yeah, my aunt was unwell, and happened to sort of live in a part of the world where assisted dying had been legalized, and was able to kind of, you know, in a very difficult time, you know, with an illness that's taken so much choice away from her, was able to, you know, reclaim some agency, and took an incredibly difficult decision, but one that, you know, me and my whole family have such a huge respect for. And I think she just was amazing anyway, but also in this decision, you know, it's a huge act of bravery. And I was able to go and see her with my sister. We were able to travel to go and see her for a bit before she died, and came back and wasn't really expecting. I'm definitely not a songwriter who's like, something's happened in my life, let me write a song about it. So I would never have dreamed of writing a song about this, but was at the studio with some friends and was just writing a bunch, and this song kind of just fell out. And I guess it's not directly about that, but it's very much, you know, inspired by that time. Yeah. And you know, I guess if the album is all sort of meditations on what the future might be and what the future looks like, so I guess this is the moment. This is the kind of only real sort of downbeat moment on the album that I guess reflects on what not having a future would look like, and how much of a, you know, how difficult that is to get your head around, I guess.
And what did it make you, that experience? What did it make you think about assisted dying in terms of it being a humane approach to people who, particularly who have terminal illness? But I sometimes think just as a choice we should all have. It is, after all, our lives. We can't choose to be born, but we can choose the rest of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I fully support it. I think it's hugely humane. Obviously, like everything, it would need to be regulated, and as was the case with her, like there are huge like checks and processes to go through. It's not a kind of easy decision, but yeah, I mean, there are so many different arguments and approaches for it. But, I guess one will be like, look at how we treat our pets when they're suffering, and yet we look to our loved ones and don't give them the same dignity and respect. Obviously, anything that can be abused is complicated, and a lot of people's faith and religion, gives them reason to not support it at all. But I had always felt like that's a decision that people should be able to make, because otherwise, perhaps you're driven to do it in another way that just puts other people in so much more kind of pain and trauma. So I don't know. That's my very, very inarticulate way of saying I could not more respect her decision, and I think that she's, it wasn't an easy one, but I think that she's amazing for taking that and being able to have, like I said, people suffering from terminal illnesses. You've had so much of your agency taken away, and to be able to reclaim that, and do something that you want to do, for yourself and for the people around you, I think that's amazing.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about you because you do sound like the world's most reluctant frontman, and you are about to go off on a major arena tour with this new album. And I wondered, what your feelings are, on the eve of embarking on something like that. Do you still get stage fright? I know that it really marred your early days in terms of your ability to enjoy what you were doing. Is that still the case?
I mean, I feel like a lot of our sort of path into the music industry and into touring was really unexpected for us and for everybody else. So I've always just really loved writing songs and being in the studio and making music, be that for us or writing for other people or whatever projects we're working on. That's where I feel comfortable. And I guess performing is obviously a hugely essential part of it. And it's something we've done right from the start. I feel kind of grateful for having been able to, begin in totally empty pubs, and we've sort of worked our way up at points very quickly, but, pretty steadily up and up and up to bigger and bigger venues. But it's, it's not something that anyone teaches you. I don't really know other people growing up in bands or, having similar experiences. So we just sort of felt our way through it. And I think I had to grow into it a bit. Like, initially I would distract myself on stage by climbing up on anything I could find, dancing around like an absolute madman, diving into the crowd. I probably looked quite confident, but that was really just me. And people are often surprised when I say that I'm not hugely comfortable on stage, because I'm very kinetic, and it just comes from me wanting to distract myself. And as we've grown as a band and made sort of more conceptual albums, we've been able to put together bigger shows that equally are a big distraction. And when we've done things with orchestras before, for me it's been a really amazing chance to kind of step back a bit and be a small part of a much bigger thing on stage,
which is where you feel more comfortable, or not?
Yeah, totally, yeah. So I guess I just there are people that get into music because they love the attention and they love feeding off a crowd and all that kind of stuff. And obviously I am hugely grateful that we're able to play gigs with which people choose to come to, and there's nothing quite like hearing the lyrics that you wrote on your laptop in your bedroom a few years ago sung back by thousands of people. Like, what an amazing thing to get to do. But I'd be lying if I said I get really excited going out on stage. I'm generally terrified. I often and it's just a bit, it's one of those things that it's kind of unfortunate, and I've obviously quite embarrassed saying it out loud because it's something that so many people dream of, but I often just come off stage feeling quite bad about myself and kind of quite insecure after gigs. And I wish I could, love it and walk off stage and sort of be giving high fives everywhere. That's just not my experience of it. But,
that's such a strange thing, though, because I can understand before you go on stage, the terror. I can totally get that. I find any kind of public speaking, ironically, really quite terrifying. But I think that lots of people who are attracted to doing things like that do feel scared. I don't think that that's unusual. But the idea that, I think you've described it, you said there's a dissonance between what we've achieved, you're talking about Bastille, and how I'm perceived and the reality in my head. It's strange to come off stage feeling, I don't know, feeling insecure about what you've done or bad about yourself.
I know. It is. I mean, it's not rational, and it's not necessarily explainable. But I think it's a kind of self-criticism. I've really come to fixate on my singing, and on the way that a lot of artists work. You rather than having the sound on stage coming out of speakers in front of you, you'll have in-ear monitors, so little headphones on, where you can basically just hear yourself. And the technology around that at the moment is amazing, where you can have everyone on stage can have a different mix, so they can hear themselves and in relation to other things in exactly the way they want. So the sound is amazing, and I'm really lucky, and our team are incredible. But sometimes when I get really nervous, I sort of go pitch deaf, where I can't really relate. I can hear noise, but I can't relate my voice to other things that are happening musically, and that, for someone that has to stand up on stage and sing in front of loads of people, is not fun. And it's just, it's something that I've worked on and got through. I think a lot of people probably wouldn't notice, and that's good if they don't, because you don't want to see someone up on stage having a bad time. But it just means it's kind of, it's a bit of a Russian roulette for me. Every now and then I'll have an amazing time. And I think there are big shows we've had, and it's definitely related to how nervous I am. Main stage at Glastonbury a couple of years ago, the first 15 minutes, thank you. The first 15 minutes, I was like, which way is this going to go? Which way is this going to go? And then I somehow pulled it back round. And the last sort of 20 minutes, I absolutely loved it and was able to be there and be enjoying the fact that there was like the pyramid stage field full of people all just going nuts to our songs. And that obviously is amazing. And I feel weird talking about it because, it's such a specific problem, and obviously compared to most people's work issues in life, it is. But that is my experience with it.
Except for the fact that it is your job, and you have to go out and do it. So it's pretty intimidating, I imagine. Yeah, go on.
To answer your question after a long, a long tangent, we are obviously so excited to be touring again, and to be putting together a show that, hopefully will expand on the themes of the album and allow us to sort of say all of those things, whilst it also being, hopefully just a really fun night. Because I, as a music fan, have missed gigs and being in rooms with other people watching music so much. Like, probably more so than playing gigs, I've missed just going to shows. It's like one of my favorite things to do. So, I feel like we're about to, so I'm backstage at the moment in Holmfirth. We're playing a place called Holmfirth Picture Dome.
Where's trying to raise money.
Yorkshire. So we stayed in Sheffield last night, but we are it's an amazing sort of people are trying to raise money for smaller venues around the UK that have really suffered, small independent venues that have obviously suffered loads over the last 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most worrying thing, isn't it? Because that's where you start. I mean, you talked about playing in empty pubs when you were starting out. That's where all the great bands first, go through the motions and learn their craft, isn't it? And if it's a bit like theatre at the moment, with all these regional theatres under threat for the same thing. And it's like, where are young actors going to come from that don't just come from Chelsea?
No, well, we cut our teeth at small venues, and the idea that those venues exist can support new music. It gives people locally all over the country a platform to play on that isn't just the internet. Like, that is vital. And that's been there's been some amazing kind of initiatives pop up over the last couple of years in an attempt to support these venues, but they've suffered so much. So you just got to hope that obviously not coming out the other side of COVID, that's a ridiculous thing to say because we don't know what's going to happen, but that as the country kind of opens up a bit more, there's obviously a huge appetite for people to want to go to live things, but obviously trepidation from others. And I just hope that the arts are supported, at all would be great, and that people feel kind of safe enough and emboldened to go and enjoy things.
Yeah. And just finally, before you go, because of the sci-fi nature of your album, I did do a call out to our listeners, asking them if they could say to Scotty, "Beam me up." Where would they like to be beamed up to? Where would be your happy place?
Oh, that's such a good question. I don't know, somewhere with all my friends. probably a pub. It's not particularly exotic, but just a pub with all my mates. I also wanted to say to you as well, I've been doing a podcast recently about books, and
Yes.
it's about a list, the BBC Novels That Shaped Our World list, which you were involved in.
Yeah, I was involved in it with lots of heated debate we had coming up with those titles. And I'd quite like to do a new one, for the 21st century, because I do feel that those lists just end up so much like 19th century. It drives me crazy.
We were saying that in talking about it, but like we chatted to Juno on the podcast, and I was fascinated by the process. I can't imagine how, having to choose and categorize all these amazing books when the remit is literally anything.
Yeah. Blood was spilt. There was a lot of pressure to include the classics. And I always think, it's quite nice to reshape those lists. So maybe it's time for a new one. Anyway, I was going to mention your podcast, and thankfully you've done it yourself. So that's very good. It's called Turn Up for the Books, and you're co-hosting it with Simon Savage. Savage.
Simon Savage and Renison Okojo, who's an amazing author and writer. It's a really fun mix of people, and we're sort of coming at it from the perspective of this list, but also it's about libraries, and it's about what, how vital they are. We speak to loads of different writers from all different walks of life, and the sort of common thread is how amazing a space that was for them, a kind of a social space, a safe space, an educational space.
Utterly brilliant. I'm cutting you off because I've got our newsreader, Rachel Jewell, making cut my throat movements outside the window, which is very scary indeed. Dan Smith, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I hope the tour goes brilliantly. I hope you enjoy every single night, and maybe I'll get to come and see one of them. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Mariella. Cheers.
Take care. That was Dan Smith of Bastille, and thanks very much, Dan, for joining me on Times Radio.